Hello and welcome to another Algebra 1 video tutorial. In Lesson 9.5 we'll be looking at the quadratic formula. Our goal will be to use the quadratic formula to solve equations of the form ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0. Because if I asked you to solve x squared plus 8x plus 7 equals 0 at this point, you don't have a method for doing that. You'd probably reach for your graphing calculator and look in the table or at the graph, and that would be one method. But we should have a mathematical way. So if you were to try and guess, the first thing you do is probably, subtract 7 from both sides. Then you'd be with x squared plus 8x equals negative 7. And then do you divide by 8? No, because then you get x squared over 8 plus x. That doesn't help you. If you square root it, you don't have a way to simplify that. So you don't have a method at this point to solve that. So we need the quadratic formula. If we have ax squared plus bx plus c, if it's in this standard form, it equals 0. And as long as a isn't 0, because then we would just have a linear equation, which we know how to solve, then we have x is going to be the opposite of b, plus or minus, because we're going to get up to 2 answers, plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac, all divided by 2a. Later on in our lessons, we'll learn how they came up with this formula, but for right now, we're going to take it as it's true, and we're going to use it. Okay, so let's go ahead and solve that one we're talking about there. X squared plus 8x plus 7 equals 0. The first thing you want to make sure is your equation, is your quadratic equation equal to 0. It always has to be of this form. Ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0. If it's in that form, we're going to use this quadratic formula. Okay, so get in the habit of listing what your a values are. So in this case, a is, it's 1x squared. You don't see 1 because it's 1 times anything itself. So the a value is 1, the b value is 8, and the c value is 7. So we want the opposite, our x is going to be the opposite of b, so negative 8, plus or minus, because like I said, there's up to 2 answers, the square root of b squared. So we're going to go 8 squared minus 4 times a times c, all divided by 2a, so 2 times 1. Do a little simplifying. You don't want to type all this in your calculator. You will need to use a lot of parentheses. You'll need the parentheses around the numerator, then around the denominator. Why not just simplify a little bit before you start using your calculator? So negative 8 plus or minus the square root of 8 squared is 64. 4 times 1 times 7 is 28, divided by 2 times 1, so divided by 2. Okay, so if you simplify piece by piece, you'll get these right the majority of the time. Sometimes you get them wrong, but you shouldn't. There's really no excuse for that. Okay, negative 8, plus or minus. All right, now 64 minus 28, that is 36, all over 2. Now, let's split this into 2 answers, 2 solutions. So I'm going to say x equals negative 8 plus the square root of 36 all over 2, or x equals negative 8 minus the square root of 36 all over 2. So negative 8 plus 6, that's negative 2, divided by 2 is negative 1. Negative 8 minus 6 is negative 14, divided by 2 is negative 7. So the solutions for this would be x equals negative 1 or negative 7. Would be the 2 solutions to that quadratic equation. If you're not sure, plug those numbers back into the original and see if you get 0. There's an easy way to check. You should not be able to get these wrongs, or at least do not know that you're not getting them wrong. Check them. If you're not sure, check them. Plug them back in and see if they are correct. Okay, next example. Solve x squared minus 5x minus 24 equals 0. So like I said, the first thing you want to check is, does your equation equal 0? Your quadratic equation equals 0, and it does. So now we just list, all right, what's the a value? A value is 1. The b value, this is a minus 5x, so we could treat this as plus negative 5x, so the b value is negative 5. The c value is a negative 24 because it's minus 24, or we could rewrite this as plus negative 24. Okay, now we have x equals the opposite of b. Now b is already negative 5, so the opposite of that is 5, plus or minus the square root of. Okay, we're going to go negative 5 squared minus 4 times 1 times negative 24, all divided by 2a. All right, now we just got to go start simplifying this to get our solutions. So 5 plus or minus the square root of. Now, negative 5 squared, that's 25. If you decide to type that in your calculator, make sure you do parentheses around negative 5 because it's not negative 25. Okay, minus, this is going to be minus a negative. And 4 times 24 is 96. 4 times negative 24 is negative 96. All divided by 2 times 1, so all over 2. All right, now the next part, x equals 5 plus or minus 25 plus 96, that is 121. All over 2, then we'll go ahead and list what our solutions are here. So x equals 5 plus, the square root of 121 is 11, all over 2, or x equals 5 minus the square root of 121, which is 11, all over 2. 5 plus 11 is 16. 16 over 2 is 8. 5 minus 11 is negative 6. Negative 6 divided by 2 is negative 3. So our two solutions would be x equals 8 or negative 3. Okay, and it doesn't hurt to check these. Go 8 squared minus, minus or plus the opposite of 5 times 8 plus negative 24. See if it equals 0, and it will. All right, the next example, we're going to solve x squared minus 3x equals 37. What are the x values that work here? Well, in this case, our equation does not equal 0. Our quadratic equation doesn't equal 0, so we need it to equal 0. So we got to subtract 37 from both sides before we even start using the quadratic formula. So x squared minus 3x minus 37 equals 0. Now we're ready for to list what our a, b, and c values are. So in this case, our a is 1, our b is negative 3, and our c is negative 37, right? I'm keeping the sign in front, so I can change this to plus negative 3x and plus negative 37. So make sure you get your signs of your a, b, and c values correct, or you may use the quadratic formula right, but you were using the wrong a, b, and c values, so it doesn't check. All right, so we want x equals the opposite of b, so that's going to be a positive 3, plus or minus the square root of negative 3 squared minus 4 times 1 times negative 37, all divided by 2 times 1. Now, the a doesn't always equal 1, but in these examples here, starting with the quadratic formula, they have been so far. Okay, so x equals 3 plus or minus 9 minus, now 4 times 1, so 4 times a negative 37, that is 148, negative 148, all divided by 2, and then I'm going to get x equals 3 plus or minus the square root of 9 plus 148, that's 157, all over 2. Now, I know 157 is not a perfect square, so this is what we would call the exact answer. Okay, exact answer. Now, if we want an approximation, we would say x is about 3 plus or minus the square root of 157 is about 3 plus or minus square root of 157 is about 12.5 over 2. Okay, so if we're listing this out, so we'd go 3 plus 12.5 over 2, or 3 minus 12.5 all over 2. So we'd get 15.5 over 2 is equal to 7.75, and then we get negative 9.5 over 2, which is negative 4.75. So there would be my approximate answers, and here would be my exact answers. So approximate, exact. All right, next example, solve x squared minus 7x equals negative 2. You should get in the habit of noticing that this quadratic equation does not equal 0, so we need to add 2 to both sides, so this equals 0. So I'd have x squared minus 7x plus 2 now equals 0. What's my a value? What's my b value? And what's my c value? Now plug those into the quadratic equation, quadratic formula, and we would get the opposite of b, so 7 plus or minus the square root of negative 7 squared minus 4 times 1 times 2 all over 2a. Then I'm going to start simplifying, so 7 plus or minus negative 7 squared is 49. 4 times 1 times 2 is 8, all over 2. Then I get x equals 7 plus or minus the square root of 41 over 2. Square root of 49 is not a perfect square, so I have this is my exact solution. And if I want an approximation, okay, so then approximate. And I'm going to get x equals 7 plus or minus, square root of 41 is about 6.4 divided by 2. So then I have x equals 7 minus 6.4 over 2, or 7 plus 6.4 over 2. And if I do that, I'm going to end up with about 0.3, and the other one is about 6.7. And once again, these are the approximate. So exact 7 plus square root of 41 over 2, and 7 minus the square root of 41 all over 2, or it's about 0.3 and 6.7 is the approximate. All right, the last example, a first aid helicopter is dropping a package of medical supplies to the ground below. The function, negative 16t squared plus 2t plus 50, gives the approximate height in feet above ground the package is at t seconds after the package is dropped. How many seconds elapse from the time the package leaves the helicopter until the package hits the ground? So we have the last quadratics and projectiles equation we were talking about last lesson with gravity and all that stuff. Anyways, what's the height above ground when it hits the ground? Well, it would be a height of 0. So we would set this equation equal to 0. So we'd say 0 equals negative 16t squared plus 2t plus 50. And the thing we liked about that is it's a quadratic equation. It's equal to 0, so we can use the quadratic formula. Our a value is negative 16, our b value is 2, and our c value is 50. So we jump into the quadratic equation, and quadratic formula, excuse me, and we'd say x is the opposite of 2 plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4 times a times c. Okay, so like I said, a is not always 1. First 4 examples it was, but now we have one where it's not. All over 2a, all over 2 times negative 16. Now we're going to start simplifying this. So negative 2 plus or minus 2 squared is 4. Minus, we're going to get minus a negative. 4 times negative 16 times 50, that's going to be negative 3200. All over negative 32. Then we're going to have x equals negative 2 plus or minus the square root of 4 plus 3200, so 3204 all over negative 32. And if I divide those out, or if I get an approximation for the square root of 3204, that's going to be about negative 2 plus or minus square root of 3204 is about 56.6 all over negative 32. And I'm going to approximate that. So this is approximate also. Approximately, you get negative 1.7 when you subtract the 2. And you get about 1.83 when you add. Okay? And this one doesn't make sense. The negative 1.7 seconds does not make sense. So we're going to say this is takes about 1.83 seconds. Once this is dropped out of the helicopter, so the time it hits the ground is less than 2 seconds, about 1.83 seconds. If you're not sure, plug that value back in and see if it equals 0, and it will. All right, that wraps us up. Your assignment will be 9-5, page 555, 2 to 18 evens. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in class.